Welcome, Slack Tide Nation, to another episode of Slack Tide Adventures. Today we're going to be following up a couple episodes we did on crabbing and talking about how to process and freeze your crabs for storage if you don't have time to do a crab boil immediately. You may or may not know this, but you really shouldn't freeze raw crab. Crabs need to be cooked before you freeze them. On this episode, we're going to review how to store your crabs to keep them alive and fresh, and also how to back your crabs, prep them for parboiling so that you can freeze them safely. There are a lot of times I know I'm going to have some people over and do a low country bowl or a crab bowl, and so I'll go out over the course of a few days and catch crab, sometimes a week or so in advance. Generally when I'll do this is I'll either store the crab for a few days on ice to keep them alive and I can boil them fresh, but if that's not an option, I can back the crab and freeze them and save them for later, and then cook the clean crab later on with either shrimp or fresh crab or just a whole big batch of frozen crab. The first thing I want to do when I'm storing these crab alive for a few days is I want to make sure I put them on ice and I put them in a cooler. This is kind of my crab cooler. I want to make sure that the plug is open down at the bottom so that they can get some oxygen. The water can drain out of it. These were a few keeper crab that I'd caught one night in about an hour. What I want to do is I want to take an old towel, dampen it with a hose, lay them on top, keep the cooler cracked a little bit so they get some airflow in there, and this will keep them damp as well. These crab will keep like this alive and fresh so long as you keep them on ice, you keep the towel damp, and you keep them out of water. If there's standing water at the bottom of the cooler, they'll die. The first thing that we want to do is dispatch the crab as humanely as possible by driving a knife through its brain, and trust me, the irony of that statement is not lost on me. Having dispatched the crab, we'll flip it over to its underside, we'll lift the apron, and then we'll pull the whole carapace off the crab. My setup for this is usually a cutting board, a steak knife, a butter knife. I usually keep a bowl with fresh water to kind of rinse everything off, a bowl for the scraps right there, and a bowl for ice to throw the pieces on ice. And this is what I mean by backing a crab. We're going to pull the carapace off the crab and exposing the insides of it. And all I'm doing here is really just cleaning the gills and the guts, all the inedible parts of the crab. I'm taking all that stuff out. I'm going to rinse it off. I usually break the crab in half because it's easier to store that way in a freezer bag. Another added benefit to keeping your crabs on ice like this is that it makes it a lot easier to clean. They're not trying to get around. They're not trying to get you with their claws. The best place to do this is obviously at the marina, but I didn't have that option tonight. A lot of times I'll take all the leftover parts, drop them into a mud minnow trap, put them in a creek somewhere. The mud minnows eat these things up. Great flounder bait if you guys are flounder fishermen. Again, all I'm doing is just picking the inedible parts of the crab out. The same thing you would do if you were boiling live crab. All the parts you don't eat, I just pick them out. This makes it a lot easier to freeze and store. This one has a little bit of a reaction when I put him down here. I was kind of worried about he was going to get me. If you've ever had one of those crabs get a hold of those pinchers, it's not something that you'll soon forget. You see, this crab has a long, slender apron right there. Female crabs have a triangular shaped apron. That's how you tell the difference between a male and a female. This guy gave me a little trouble. He was a big, thick crab, thick shell, and he didn't want to give up his carapace at all. I had to take the butter knife out. Usually you can just pry them open. Sometimes you got to get in there with a butter knife and cut some of that connective tissue. Just a reminder again that you should not be freezing raw crab. So what I'm going to do at the end of this video, I'll show you. Basically, I just boil these crabs, these back crabs, for about 8 or 9 minutes in some boiling water. Pull them out. I pull them out, I put them in some ice water to stop the cooking process, and once they're nice and cool, I put them in a Ziploc bag and drop them in the freezer. The process doesn't take very long at all once the water is boiling. I don't even put any seasoning in the water. All I'm trying to do is to prep these crabs for storage. You see, once they're cooked, I put them in a bowl of ice water. That stops the cooking process and cools them off and gets them ready for the freezer. There are a lot of times I'll take some chicken necks out on the boat with me after we're fishing or after we're tubing. We can kind of hit a quick crabbing trip, pull up a dozen or so crab in a very short amount of time, take them home, get them prepped, and stored for the next time we have a crab boil. Once they're cooled, store them in a Ziploc freezer bag, put them in your freezer, and they'll be good for months. When you're ready to enjoy them, just pop them out of the freezer, put them in some boiling water with your vegetables and seasoning, and go have a crab boil. I hope you enjoyed this how-to moment from Slack Tide Adventures. If you liked the video, please share it with your friends. And I encourage you to subscribe to the channel. As always, I appreciate you guys spending your time with us. And I hope you get out there and find your own Slack Tide to enjoy.